April the 27th, are coming to you live from the LBC election battle bus in Glasgow as we start a nationwide tour of the country. Coming up in this hour, the idea that if you can't see your doctor, you might see his or her assistant. But would it actually work? As it's revealed that the number of wind turbines have almost doubled in a year, are they a blot on the landscape or a necessary sign of how the nation is going green? That scrap on the telly yesterday, Ed Miliband versus Boris Johnson, who actually won? And also putting to the test here in Scotland the youngsters who were able to vote in the referendum. They're denied a vote in the general election because they haven't attained the age of 18 yet, but which way would they call it? You'll find out in our live experiment in the classroom later in the show. And joining me in the battle bus now, prominent Lib Dem Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Danny Alexander, who's come down from his Northern Scotland constituency to join me in Glasgow. Thank you for making the flight. Beautiful flight, I would imagine.
It was wonderful. Yeah. We had snow on the ground when I left this morning, and it was just wonderful to fly over the mountains and see that.
Okay, so you've seen much of Scotland as you've flown down to see me. What did you soak up? Which way is this great, great country going at the moment? In all honesty, where do you see it headed in 10 days' time?
Well, I guess the contests that I'm most interested in are the constituencies where we have Liberal Democrat MPs who are, in all cases, fighting off a sort of nationalist challenge. I think in all those cases we'll see Lib Dems holding on because I think that we have a good message.
Really?
Yeah, I do, because I think that you've got very, very hard-working Lib Dem MPs who've got a good local reputation. People can see that the difference that they've made, they can see the difference the party has made. Of course, these are all, or in most cases, pretty tough battles. I think that the polls would suggest that, I mean, we're here in Glasgow. In the central belt of Scotland, you'll see a lot of the Labour vote falling away and going to the SNP, partly because, to be honest, in a lot of these communities, the Labour Party has taken people for granted, in some cases for decades and decades. And whereas, I think in our constituencies, well, you know it because you've seen Lib Dem MPs in action all around the UK, you know, we have incredibly hard-working MPs who focus on their community. In addition, there are things we've done in government. You know, we've turned the economy around, got the economy growing, created jobs. At the end of this week, on Friday, payday for a lot of people, they'll see the benefit of the next round of Lib Dem-led income tax cuts coming through in their pay packets. That's something which I think will focus people on actually the difference that the Lib Dems have made in government.
But, Mr Alexander, you say you've turned the country around, and indeed you can point to a raft of figures that prove that, but if Ed Miliband was on board this bus, he would also say we're in bigger debt than we've ever been before. You've only done it by borrowing more money. Isn't that the truth?
Well, when we came into government, the deficit was 150 billion. Now, this year it's expected to be down to 75
but the actual
billion.
debt is the highest
No,
ever.
look, every year you run a deficit, you add to your debt. That's right. And so the national debt is higher than it was when we started. If we'd said, well, we're going to cut the deficit to zero immediately, that would have meant massively swinging cuts of the sort that perhaps might suit some Conservatives, but which I wouldn't tolerate. And so we have had a plan which has been getting the deficit down. We'll eliminate the deficit by 2017 on the Lib Dem plans. That will enable the country to turn the corner. It will enable our debt to start falling as a share of our economy, which is the kind of internationally recognised measure. But in a sense, the point you're making, Nick, is a good one because it shows that there's a lot more to be done. I'm certainly not resting on my laurels. I'm certainly not saying all the countries...
You'll be borrowing more money.
I'm certainly not saying all the country's economic problems are fixed. Far from it. There's more work to be done.
More money to be borrowed.
More work to be done to cut the deficit. So you're right.
More money to be borrowed.
There'll be money borrowed this year. There'll be money borrowed next year. By 2017-18, we'll have the structural deficit gone on our plans. Labour would leave that a lot longer. The Nationalists even longer. They'd borrow hundreds of billions of pounds more than I think is appropriate for the country. But after that, we can then allow spending to start growing again as a share of the economy. We can start getting our debt down. But I think it makes the point that there's a job to be finished. And we've got to finish it fairly, but we've got to finish it, and that's what we Lib Dems want to do.
Presumably it was the person who held your position in the outgoing Labour government, Chief Secretary of the Treasury. Was it Liam Byrne who left the note saying there's nothing in the till? Were you the recipient of it? Who got that note?
Well, actually, it was David Laws.
Right, okay.
So,
what did you make of that note? Because they try and say it was a bit of fun and it was just in jest. How do you respond to that famous note?
I thought it was, I thought it was pretty appalling, actually. I mean, I think the idea that as someone who's been Chief Secretary of the Treasury, you'd think it was funny that you had left a position which you were willing to describe yourself as there being no money left.
And the note said something like, I'm sorry, there's nothing left in the till.
It said, I'm sorry, there's no money left. Was
Have
actually,
you seen this?
I've seen the note.
Where is it now? Who is the keeper of the note?
So David Laws was the recipient of the note. He has the original, and no doubt it'll be placed in the National Archives in the years to come. I actually penned a reply last week, which I published, which said, "I'm sorry for the delay in replying. I've been busy fixing the economy. The deficit halved, jobs up, growth up, and that's the Lib Dem record. And we're not going to allow."
What note would you leave, Mr. Alexander?
Well, I'd leave a note.
A shorter note.
I'd leave a note.
Shorter note.
I'd leave a note saying, "The deficit down, jobs up, growth up. Don't screw it up."
Do you think how much has the Lib Dems been credited for the work they've done in the coalition?
I think we've been well credited, but I'd like us to have much more credit. I think that one of the frustrations that I have is that the Tories often seem to claim the credit for the economic recovery for themselves, when in fact the only reason we have a balanced plan is because you've had me and Nick Clegg there making that happen. I saw a bunch of business people in the Daily Telegraph this morning. They were praising the coalition's economic plan. That is as much down to the Lib Dems as the Tories. I think that one of the big Tory lies in this election campaign is that their economic policy is to carry on what we've been doing for the last 5 years. That isn't true. What they're actually wanting to do is to lurch to the right, because they don't want to have a fair way of dealing with the deficit. They only want it to be spending cuts. They want this massive cuts to welfare. They want to go on cutting beyond what's necessary to balance the books. That's an ideological agenda for shrinking the state rather than just a practical job that has to be done to get the economy back on track. So actually the Conservatives are not sticking to the plan. They're lurching away from it. If you want to carry on with the way that we've been running the economy up till now, then you need to have Liberal Democrats in the mix in the next Parliament.
You mentioned the newspapers. Mr. Clegg is in the papers again today saying that he will stay on, as providing he wins Sheffield Hallam, he will stay on as Lib Dem leader. How much tension and division is there in the party that he has to keep saying this?
None.
Mr. Alexander.
He will win his constituency hands down, and I would like him to carry on for leader for as long as possible.
But if he doesn't, and you do, you'd throw your hat in the ring, Mr. Alexander.
The people who ask questions about this are quite reasonably journalists like you. It's not something that comes up.
Well, I want to know if we're being called Danny. This is my question. You see,
it's not. It'd have to be Dial Danny.
Dial Danny.
But
or ask Alex.
It's not something that comes up. And look, I'm focused on winning my own constituency. I'm focused on making sure that we have Liberal Democrats back in government.
What about Steve Farron? Is he focused on pulling for the party? Are you all happy together?
I think you mean Tim Farron.
Tim Farron, sorry. What did I call him?
You call him Steve.
Sorry,
yeah.
Tim Farron.
He may have a brother that we don't know about.
That's right. Yes.
I know he's doing.
He's happy in the scrum as well, all pushing in the same direction.
He's doing a great job as our foreign affairs spokesman. And
he's not on manoeuvres.
I've no idea what he's doing. I think he's spending time winning his seat in the north of England.
In the event that Nick Clegg does not win, what will it be? It'll be you, Farron, and Vince Cable, will it?
Well, Nick will win, and he will carry on as leader, as he said yesterday, for a very long time. That's not something I've given a moment's thought to, because I'm spending my time making sure that we get as many Lib Dem MPs as possible, because that's the only way to make sure that we have a strong economy and a fair society.
I know I can rely on you not to go into constituency matters because of various regulations, but we can talk about your standing in the constituency. I have a note now that the SNP are leading you by 50 points, placed 21. Is this the last time we're going to chat with you as a prominent politician, Mr. Alexander? I'll always have you back because you're a nice fellow and we've always got on well. But this is the last time, isn't it, as a prominent politician?
Well, I'm not going to go into the constituency details for the reasons that you say, but I think that...
You're being squeezed.
I think there's a lot of reliance on these constituency polls, all of which are put together by a prominent Conservative peer, who I think it's fair to say does not have my best interests at heart. So I take them with a big pinch of salt. And I think across Scotland you will see Liberal Democrats resisting the SNP, holding on in our constituencies, because we're the people who've turned the economy around. We're the people who're creating jobs in Scotland, cutting taxes for working people in Scotland. And also I think in Scotland you'll see there are a lot of people who don't want the SNP because they don't want to see this country moving back to another independence referendum. And so I think that across Scotland there'll be a lot of tactical voting for the Lib Dems to stop the Nationalists getting in. And I think that will actually see our MPs in a range of constituencies being successful again. So
what would you go back to in the middle of May? Back into the media, do you think, if you're not successful?
I'm not intending not to be successful. I'm intending to win. Okay. I haven't given a moment's thought to what would happen in those circumstances. Because look, but I think there's a serious point here, Nick.
Of course.
Which is that I think at this election the country needs the Liberal Democrats more than ever, because it's quite clear that neither the Tories nor Labour are going to win this election. So there's going to be a hung parliament. So the question you've got to ask yourself is, do you want Alex Salmond or Nigel Farage holding the balance of power, holding a minority government hostage, on life support, just constantly threatening to pull the plug out at any moment, it would be chaos. The government would be paralysed by indecision. The only things it could do were things that these more extreme parties were willing to let them do. Or do you want to continue with the stability, with the strength that you've had over the last 5 years? We're the only party that's able to say that we can keep the country in the centre ground and, in a hung parliament, ensure economic stability. And I think that's why people need the Liberal Democrats even more over the next 5 years than even we have over the last 5.
Who's quicker at mental arithmetic, you or George Osborne?
I'm not sure we've ever had that contest, to be honest.
Aren't you surprised that when Mr. Osborne appeared on a Sky News panel with some children, he was asked a mental arithmetic question, he wouldn't do it? Weren't you surprised by that?
I didn't even see the programme.
I mean, you would do one, wouldn't you? If I was to ask you...
I'll do one. I'm not going to have a whole mental arithmetic.
8 sevens.
56.
Oh, that was pretty impressive. I have a final number challenge for you, Mr. Alexander. Are you ready for this? To celebrate the Scottishness of our trip, I have had a giant haggis produced.
You have?
Look
at that.
But I want you to guess the weight of that haggis. So that's... And you can take that, by the way, for your family and your supporters. But I need you either in kilos or pounds. Give it a good shake. What sort of weight? Guess the weight of the haggis. Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Danny Alexander, go ahead.
I'd say it's about 3 kilos, 3.5 maybe.
That's not bad. It's 3.8 kilos. So that's pretty good. Or in old money, 8.3 pounds. Congratulations.
That is one hell of a haggis, by the way. I'm not sure that listeners can see this, but it's a giant. It's a beast.
It's a beastie.
This one was running around the mountains for many, many years before Nick Ferrari slaughtered it in the dead of night last night.
And it was in the dead of night, and it's hung overnight, and it's packaged for you and your family and your support. And if you can give a piece to Mr. Clegg, I'd be grateful. Thanks for coming down. Have a safe flight back. What a glorious flight as well in this weather. You'll have a glorious flight as you return. Danny Alexander, Chief Secretary of the Treasury. Thanks for coming and joining us here on the Election Battle Bus. Coming up after the news, you want to see the doctor, but you can't. But you can see my assistant. How will that work after this? 8:15 headlines. Lisa Aziz on LBC.